Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, Doug. It is such a pleasure to have you. Before we dive into our topic today, would you just tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to this place today?
Yeah. Well, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've spent in my, 20 years post-college career kind of toggling back and forth between leading nonprofits and being a sort of strategic outsider outside working with nonprofit leaders. And have kind of scaled up and down for the last 20 years of that. But for the last 7, have specifically just been doing the consulting thing. So I've led 4 nonprofits and then have now worked with about 1,300 through the last 20 years. So it's a little bit of everything. As you know, if you're a nonprofit leader, you have to be a Swiss Army knife. And that has been true of my 20-year career as well.
That's right. So what draws you to the work you do now, working as a consultant with nonprofits? Yeah. And just give us a little sense of what that work tends to look like.
Yeah. One of the things that I like most about what I get to do now is working with leaders who are really passionate about different things. And so a lot of the work when you're leading a nonprofit is you're focused on one very specific mission. I think one of the things that as I've gotten older that I've liked is the variety of working with people who are really wanting to make a dent in some of the biggest problems in the world, but in different sectors and doing different kinds of things. And so I think that's one of the things that I, like, at least right now for me, am enjoying quite a lot. But I just really love getting to work with strategy at a high level and then actually helping people realize it at a foot off the ground as well. So we kind of joke a fair amount on our team that just because it looks good on a whiteboard does not mean that it'll work in real life. We love getting to actually help people actualize their vision and not just live in some ephemeral place.
Yeah, what you just said and what your team says is so true. I've seen it again and again throughout my experience with working in nonprofits and outside like you. I see people create policies. They sound great, and then you start to implement them and you go, oh God, this is horrible. Or yep. Recently, last year or the year before even, time flies, started really reworking a new board job description because I saw again and again the fundamental description sounds great. And then you try to use it and it's full of frustration and confusion. And I see that with strategies again and yep. again. So, I'm someone who's a huge fan of getting things implemented. I've even said many times, I can't work in the traditional strategic planning model because the chance of it getting implemented is too slim and it just crushes my heart and soul. And so I need to make sure that however I'm working, it's stuff that's getting implemented. So I'd love to ask you, what have you found that works really well for getting things implemented, and or what are the things that you've been yeah, that sounded good and that doesn't work?
Yeah. I think when we're talking about strategic planning or execution or things like that, I think one of the challenges that the nonprofit sector faces is they're regularly having to take templates or processes that were developed in another sector, primarily the business world, and are bringing it into the nonprofit world, but we design things with the end in mind. And so a nonprofit's end state is more impact. A business's end state is more profit. Those are different things. And
Yeah.
so I think part of like the nonprofit world is we need to increase execution and accountability in like day-to-day life. But at the same time, we have to leave we have to leave room for like freedom and flexibility and the passion that exists. So, because have made a decision to make significantly less money most of the time to be in this world, and there's a trade-off that exists, and one of those things is freedom and passion. And so finding frameworks and how we do planning and strategy in a way that allows for that delicate balance, I think, is one of the most important things for leaders who are leading in this space.
Yeah. I completely agree. In fact, yeah, I do some for-profit coaching as well. And we were just talking about, I see this even like with passionate founders, whether they're for-profits or nonprofits. There's that balance because when you're really excited about something, that passion is motivating. And sometimes if it's even not the most important thing to do right now, keeping your energy going and like getting the momentum of the drive of doing something that maybe isn't as important, but really, really excites you is important, right? That's relevant. That's so key. I love that you brought that up. Can you take us in a little deeper, when you think about, well, let me step back. In your mind, what is the purpose of strategy? And what does a strategy look like the way you do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a low key, like really big front burner question right now, not just for nonprofits, but I think kind of writ large in organizational strategy is that you've got a lot of people who have plans, but they don't have strategy, and and sometimes we're confusing the two of those things. One of my favorite definitions of strategy is a guy named Mark Pollard, and he says strategy is an informed opinion about how to win. And I think at some very basic level, strategy is how we intend to get from A to B, but it's a guess, and it's an informed guess, an educated guess, a researched guess, an opinion, but it's a hypothesis. It's if we do blank, then blank will happen, and there's always the chance that you could be wrong. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about strategy, we end up talking about focus areas or pillars or things like that, which are necessary when we're planning. But those things, if they're not connected to a larger macro hypothesis of if we do blank, then blank will happen in the world, then we've given ourselves like high project level busy work. And so we're actually missing strategy. And so I want to know, like, strategy has to deal with your biggest obstacles for what's going to block your mission. So how are you dealing with that in your strategy? I want to know that. And then your plan should be telling us, like, here's measurably how we're getting from A, where we are now, to B, how we think we're going to get there. So
yeah,
this is a big soapbox. I could go on, but I think this is a big one for a lot of people. Like, we're mistaking goals sometimes with strategy. You saying you have a big goal does not mean that that's the right strategy. You just have given yourself a goal.
Yeah. Well, to encourage you to go on, I'll share a little bit about my thinking on this, and then you can agree or disagree or fill in.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, because I've tackled this issue myself, and in a really short nutshell, I came down to, after diving into the academic research on goal setting, because you can't really get good at strategy without learning a lot about goals, it became really clear that goals have outcome goals, things that you'd like to have happen, but you don't have direct control over, like, get somebody to give you more money, or just have more money in general, have a bunch of people give you more money, or, turn somebody from homeless to not homeless. And then the other group of goals are the action goals. The nerds call them, no, I shouldn't say nerds. The academics call them process goals. I don't like that term, but those are the goals.
And lag measures.
You can measure the lead and lag of, outcomes and process goals, but process goals are goals that you have control over. And so they can look like tactics to me. I like to think of them as tactics. So they're things that you can do. Like, you can make 100 phone calls to try to raise $100,000, right? The $100,000, the outcome goal, the make 100 phone calls. But your execution goals, could be wrong. And then inside your execution goal, which, has some sort of measurement, then you've got all sorts of projects and tasks you might have to do in order to complete it. And that's even assuming that you chose the right activity, process, execution goal, tactic to do in the first place. And what I see going wrong is when people don't differentiate between those two things. They either do, like you said, a lot of busy work, and then they're like, well, we don't really know if this worked because we weren't really clear on what we were trying to do. Or they're like, this isn't working, and they're not able to say, well, is it because we chose the wrong action to get the result? Or is it because we didn't actually do the work we said we were going to do, right? So I'll just stop there and let you riff on about strategy. And
Well, you're hitting on a number of things. One is, again, because I think to a certain degree, particularly with founders in nonprofit life, this is obviously true in the business sector as well. They're very, very high on vision, which tend to lead more towards the outcome goals that we're talking about. And I think there's this sense that like my force of will and the team will get this over the finish line because we're so passionate about this thing, and we're just going to work hard as we can to make sure that this happens. But sometimes like that's just not good enough. Like your will is not necessarily good enough. You still need a good plan. You still need a good strategy. We have to live in the real world. And so I think actually this is one of those cases where it's really important to schedule around like, how do we pump the brakes and actually like review what it is that like we thought blank was going to be true. Did that happen? Like, and so like we call it assumptions mapping. Like whenever we're putting a plan into place, we're making assumptions that X, Y, and Z are true.
Right.
Were X, Y, and Z true? And how would we know if they were true or not true? Are we able to isolate some variables to see like, hey, we thought this, if we change this one thing, then it would lead to like a disproportionate return of investment. Was that true? And so saying those things ahead of time and taking the time to think well about those things so that we can analyze them on the back end, I think is really important. It's really hard though, in a space where it feels like, again, because we're in this game for impact, that if I slow down, less people are going to experience the benefit of the mission. But I think we have to take a longer range view on some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as it feels that way, in my experience, it is the opposite. The more you try to cram on your plate, the less impact you will have. And every time I work with folks, one of the things they start learning, I don't like to say slow down because nobody wants to slow down in the nonprofit space because they're so passion driven. But when we talk about learning how much you and your team can actually get done in I usually use a 2-week period, then you can start to right size what you put on your plate. And people start to learn when I put too much on my plate, like being a heavy boat. I'm a sailor, so I like to use boats, right?
Oh, nice.
You go slowly, the heavier your boat is. So putting just the right amount that's the right capacity for you and your team, and all of a sudden you go quickly, and then you can keep putting new things on your boat, and all of a sudden the number of things that you put on your boat and got complete and finished off between 1 month and 6 months, let's say, starts to be a lot of things. And the secret is always putting less on your plate at one time.
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It makes me like, we use the term bandwidth for this. Like, how much bandwidth does your team actually have? Which is a different way of saying like, how much can you get done in 2 weeks realistically? But then also, I think this goes back to the critical thinking piece when it comes to strategy and execution is so much of, because there is it feels like an insurmountable work to get done in the space that we're in. It's really important that we use the Pareto principle of 20% of the effort will almost always produce 80% of the results. And so our biggest question is always, what will produce that disproportionate amount of return? Am I putting the right things on the plate to begin with in that 2-week period? And that sometimes takes a little bit of time to figure out, and it's worth figuring out, because what you don't want to happen is to flip that, where 80% of the results or of the effort is only producing 20%, And I actually see that a lot. Is
Yeah.
a lot of effort is put into the wrong things, and it's not producing the impact that people are wanting.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And since I already brought up sailing, just kind of an aha moment because I've been a huge fan of the Pareto principle and in business really and in life thinking about what's
Yeah.
the 20% that's going to get the 80% in the results. But thinking about flipping the coin, I'm a sailboat racer.
Oh
And
wow.
there are a number of people who, through the years, I've taken people on and trained them. And there's the group of people who are like, oh, yeah, this is so awesome. And there's a group of people who are like, why are you doing all this extra hard work for like a 30-second time gain? And it's because the world of high performance is where you mastered the 20% that gets the 80% of the
Yes.
results. And now you're going after that remaining 80% of work to get the final 20% of results. And the returns are what you need to win if it's a competitive environment, but the returns are minuscule. Like literally,
Yes.
we will bust our butts on the sailboat to gain a couple of seconds
Yeah.
over an hour-long race.
And this is we are talking about, this is where I think there's a little bit of friction in this space where, because you've got a group of passionate people, that doesn't always equal disciplined people. And so the discipline of learning, like, I'm really going to analyze what the best effort is to create the foundation work that we need. And then to your point, once we master that, the right 20%, then we can have conversations about what gets stacked on the foundation on top of that,
That's
and
right.
start talking about optimizing and maximizing. But I feel like some of those conversations are happening too early. We need to
Totally.
we
And
need to do the most important things first, then let's stack some bells and whistles on top of that.
that's right. And most of the time, and it takes a lot. I mean, this can't be understated. It takes a lot to get to the point of finding that 20% and doing that 20% and gaining the discipline, doing that team wide. But oftentimes, once you figure out what that 20% is, it's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll talk about, because this is where it's difficult, and it doesn't matter what sector you're in. There's you, the individual, and like learning what's my, like we talk about, we want to be in like a 70-30 sweet spot where 70% of my time is spent on the things that I'm best at, and 30% is every job you're doing things you don't want to do, and that's just life.
Yeah.
So there's like me, the individual leader, operating within the wider macro system of the team itself, and I need to like figure it out for myself so that the team can also figure out, like, I'm a chess piece on the board. How am I used in the macro system that we find ourselves in?
Yeah.
And that takes time. Like, it took me a long time to figure out, oh, I'm not this other person, I'm this person. And who I wanted to, like, the cultural oughts and shoulds that are put on me make me want to be a person that is different than who I actually am, but who am I? And
Yeah.
so it does get complicated, doesn't it?
It does. It does. So I want to ask you, having been an executive director yourself, running a nonprofit directly, what are your feelings or your experiences about what it feels like to develop and implement strategy inside the organization versus outside?
Yeah. Uh, Inside the organization, there's nothing I enjoy more as a leader than like when we get 6 to 9 months into a new plan and it starts to click and it starts to work, because you know that it's only working because you were disciplined to do the things that you wrote down. I think there's just something so satisfying about that, where the results that are happening, sort of going back to the conversation we're having a few minutes ago about process orientation and outcome orientation, like when those things are connecting, where I'm seeing how the things that I put into the inputs are now leading to the outputs. And it was only hard work that did that. It wasn't luck or strategy or smarts. It was just doing hard work and then seeing the mission move forward because of that. I don't think there's anything personally that I find more invigorating than, we had a guess. We did a lot of work to get that guess right. We thought it was right. It looks like it's right. And we're doing the hard work to accompany it. For me, there's very few things that that I enjoy more than that. I think on the outside, it is watching. There is something that happens that is one of my favorite things when we're doing strategic planning and vision clarity with an organization where they've had some bad experiences with strategic planning in the past where it ended up being, a 70, 80 page document that lived in a folder on like a shelf behind me that they never once picked up after they did it. They just did it because the board told them they had to do it. Where there's a click that happens for them as well where they're realizing, oh, the thing we're naming, if we do it, it'll work. You can watch their confidence grow and the level of, Brene Brown talks about how clarity is kindness.
Yeah.
And how like one of the best ways we can serve leaders is by giving them clarity, and that's how we can be kind to them, because you're watching their confidence grow in real time, as they're seeing like, oh, this is what this is supposed to be. This will really work. I could start doing this on Monday. And I think that's one of my favorite things is actually getting a tactical plan in people's hands as well as just strategy.
Yeah. I love that. So what are some of your tips or processes for getting people that discipline that it takes to really execute a strategy?
Yeah. I think we have to start with ourselves first, and then we go out from there, particularly like if a lot of the listeners of this podcast are leading a nonprofit. You're the one who is defining the culture. You are the one who is doing a lot of the level setting, whether you mean to or not, you are. And so whenever we're doing strategy and thinking about the future, we have to also be thinking about like ourselves first, and really thinking about like we are all prone to self-preservation as leaders. And so there are 3 questions that we like when we're working with like an executive team at the beginning of a process that we'll have some discussion around. And those 3 questions are, as we're thinking about going into the future and planning and even your role within what it is that we're doing, what am I afraid of losing? What am I trying to hide? And what am I trying to prove, and to whom?
Interesting.
So
Great question.
What am I afraid of losing? What am I trying to hide? What am I trying to prove, and to whom? Because I think when we're talking about planning, we're talking about right-sizing an organization's sense of responsibility for the mission at hand with our own finiteness. Like we can't, no one organization is fixing poverty. It's going to take a lot of different people. But our question is like, what's our responsibility within that? And sometimes we can overswing because we're trying to prove something, or we can underswing because we're afraid because something happened. And so like, I want to start first with like that self-awareness piece, so that we're able to name the ambition, or we're able to name the fear, and then we can like at least be aware of it as we're going into it. Because really what we're trying to do is some sense of communal discernment around what we feel as an organization we're responsible to in regard to this bigger mission that we all happen to be a part of.
Yeah, I love that. Talking about, things that work and things that don't work. And just to be fully transparent, in my own work and strategy, I quickly came to 2 conclusions. One is that we need to revisit and revise our strategies frequently so that we can adapt to change. And I ended up settling on a frequency of 2 months. So my clients, every 2 months, they revisit their strategy. And the second thing that was related to that was we needed to get the board out of the picture because, one, they weren't the best thought partners at the table for strategy, and developing strategy, executing every 2 months, that was just way too frequent also. So I'm wondering where you have landed on boards, as well as how frequently and what does it mean to revisit strategy?
These are great questions. We've landed on quarterly, so every 90 days. But I will say that depending on the team that we're working with, that can go faster. And so there was one that we were working with earlier this week, and they've chosen every 60 days. And so I don't think this is a hard and fast rule. It's more, talk to me about like the rhythms that you've got as an executive team and the way that you're functioning. So I would say generally we go to more a 90-day period, but 60 is not abnormal. I would say maybe 20 to 40% of the organizations we're working with are choosing that. From a board perspective, I think the way that our process works out is the board has a role of giving input on the macro strategy. So we're talking about like 5 to 10 years into the future. But when we start getting into like 3-year goals, 1-year goals, 90-day goals, whatever those might be, and the milestones we're trying to hit with KPIs, the board is just not in day-to-day life enough to be shaping those things. And they should be holding the executive director accountable to the goals that the team sets. And if they're not hitting them, asking questions as to why and maybe aiding around that. But they are not in the day-to-day enough to be able to know what the right things would be, or they've got the wrong filters on.
Yeah.
They'll bring their governmental filters, or they'll bring their business sector filters into it, and the nonprofit world just exists differently. So I think we're probably close to the same page on some of those. I want their voice at key moments in the process, but when we start getting a foot off the ground, I don't think that they are in the day-to-day enough to be able to speak into that well.
So let me ask you a hard question, and you don't have to answer it either, but because it's a question that plagued me, is why, or is the board the best group of people to set the biggest directional goals?
I don't think they are the most important. I think when we are doing this with an organization, we're working with them to create a collection of stakeholders who are providing, like, you've got, majority is going to be executive team. You're going to have some maybe like ancillary staff, a couple of key donors, a couple of board members, maybe even a couple of people who are, if you're running programs, who are like program participants that you feel like have a really good purview. But it's helping them know what their role within the process is. And so for them, when we've got a group of stakeholders, let's say it's 20 of them, their role is to like give feedback and to tell us what your experience has been, not necessarily talking like, tell me what we're going to be doing 10 years in the future and what those are going to be. But we want to, once we set the strategy and the direction and the vision, I still want to have a couple of feedback loops to make sure that it's connecting with them. Like if we're that, and figuring out how they can know that with the seat that they're on, with the hat they're wearing, is I think the trickiest part of planning. In figuring out like, how do we balance, like I'm a big fan of human-centered design and doing that, but it does have its limits in some respects as well. And so finding the right alchemy between the people who are specialists and the people who are generalists and the different hats that we're all wearing at the same time. Hopefully a process-oriented approach to planning figures those things out as you're going.
Yeah, I love that. And a similar question, in my own search of answering that question, like and let me separate. So when I think of like, we have to always bring all our stakeholders, our largest our team in the largest sense of the word along with us, or potentially identify those who really don't want to be on the journey and let them go compassionately, free them to be on their own way, because that's how we do change management, right? We're not going to implement a plan if we don't have buy-in. But putting that piece aside for the moment, I spent a lot of time thinking and learning about like who ends up being the kind of best group or groups to set those biggest directional goals. Like where's our North Star or set of stars that are getting, I like to think of the mission as the ultimate North Star. And it's almost always, any founder or visionary CEO, executives for sure. But the surprise group for me has been when I bring, or my clients bring, volunteers and clients into the kind of visioning, big thinking process. They have been like the most visionary, the most bold, right? If we're talking like BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals, like they're the ones in the room who have this like clarity about what exactly it's going to look like and feel like, and it's way bolder. And I'm wondering if you've seen the same thing or have found something else.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on where the organization is in terms of its life cycle. Like, how old is it? Do they feel like they have plateaued? Do they feel like they're declining? Are they getting ready to scale? Do they feel like the wind's at their back, using a sailing metaphor? I guess that may be more of a running metaphor, but
actually, when your wind is at your back in sailing, it's called running.
Well, worlds are colliding.
There you go.
Yeah, I think some of it depends on where they are in their life cycle, how they're feeling about it. There's also, I think, one of the more challenging pieces is, that sociological phenomenon, the curse of knowledge. And the more that you've been successful in something, the harder it is to see other ways of doing it. And so what you're describing, I think, is really helpful in a visioneering process before even we get to the strategy piece.
Yeah.
Which is blow the top off the thing and like get people in the room who don't know what's not possible. And that really actually like going, I think, to like when Simon Sinek talks about starting with why, like that's what they're doing is they're like, this is why we're doing this in the first place. And you're living in this reality that's all the reasons it won't work. Let's start with why it should work first.
Yeah.
And the world needs this to work. And let's actually, for a moment, just put aside all of the reasons that it won't. And let's talk about why it's important that it does. And I think starting there is a really important thing because it's connecting with why we exist to begin with. And then let's talk about what are the different ways that we could get to that goal. And it might be that we've overshot our own ambition, and that's okay. We can dial it back. That's right. The point of
better
a process.
To overshoot than undershoot, probably initially.
Yeah. Because if you undershoot, then you end up with a bunch of people who are managing decline, and that is not why anyone is working at a nonprofit. No one wants to manage decline. We actually want to see the world change as a result of the work we're putting in. Yeah. So let's get the passionate people in the room. That doesn't mean that they're going to run the ship on all the decision making, but let's make sure that they have a voice into it because they're bringing a real gift to this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are pretty much at time. I'd love you to share with us any parting words you'd love to leave with people, and then what kinds of folks should reach out to you, and what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. Parting words. I think I would really encourage people to, because this topic has largely been around strategies, to really see if you can identify, we call it an if-then strategy statement, like if we do blank, then blank will happen. So are you able to name that for like what your change theory is for whatever it is that your mission is going after and how that's drilling down tactically? If we do blank, then blank will happen. If you're not able to clearly articulate that, then at best your strategy's fuzzy. At worst, you don't have one. And so that's okay if you don't. Like, just start there and then come along. There are lots of people that can help you develop a strategy. I think primarily we're working with people who are in the C-suite or the executive team of a nonprofit. We kind of do a lot of work around innovation and scaling and strategy. And so if that's you, go to wearecatapult.org. We'd love to have a conversation.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for being with us today. And thank you out there for listening and for everything that you do to make our communities better. Before you sign off the podcast for the moment, I'd love for you to rate and review the podcast. It helps people find it, and share this episode if you found it helpful with a friend or colleague who could also benefit from these conversations. Until next time, take care of yourself and all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.